I'm not going to show you a preset. I'm going to show you exactly how I think whenever I'm editing my travel photos. You know, when it comes to editing pictures, I really see it as a creative art form on how are you trying to convey feelings? What message are you trying to send in your pictures? This picture is me at a temple out in Bali, and whenever I see it, the first thing that comes to mind is I really want to make it look more cinematic and really focus on the water droplets. So I think the first thing I'm going to try is to drop my exposure a little bit to give it that more contrast look. Because I want the backlit dramatic and not blown out. I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit. If I do that, maybe bring the exposure back up a little bit. Really, whenever editing, it's really just going back and forth until you really like what works. I am going to bring the shadows up, that way I can see more details in the pictures. I am going to bring up the vibrance just a tiny bit because the lighting in this picture was already so good. And as always, we're going to drop a point in our shadows, our midtones, and our highlights. Me, personally, it's all preference, but I like blues in my shadows. And I also think for this picture, it's going to look better if I bring up the midtones too with a hint of blue. But I really feel like mask is where we're going to exceed at. So we're going to go with the radial gradient. We want to turn it so that way you can really focus on the subject. I'm going to bring up the exposure so your eye really tends to focus on what's happening right there. Contrast. Yeah, why not? I am going to bring up the shadows. I'm going to bring down the whites so I don't overexpose the water. And I am going to bring back a little bit of warmth into me. I feel like that gives really good separation between me and the background. And here, I always like to see before and afters just to make sure I'm not overdoing anything. Next, I'm going to grab a linear gradient right here. And I'm going to focus on the top part of this picture. Drag it down a bit. And I'm going to drop the exposure just a tiny bit so your eye naturally leads to the water fountain and the droplets with me. Do you just see how it kind of just forces your eye downwards? Because I really want the attention on the action in the picture. Yeah, I think I really like that a lot better. And as I'm noticing this, I really feel like there's too much red in my skin tone. In the hue, I'm going to bring it up slightly. And I'm also going to play around with the oranges before and after. So this one's not a major difference. I think I am going to mess around with the midtones a bit. I'm a really big fan of having the blues in the shadows and oranges in the highlights. I'm also going to go back to my mask right here and bring up the temperature slightly on me, and there we have it. This next picture was whenever I went diving at this sculpture out in Bali, and here the first thing is we really need to work on the white balance. Some yellows back into the picture. Just because we're underwater, everything's so blue, and I didn't have a red filter on my camera. And I'm also going to take some greens out of it too. And just seeing like the sand looks more white. So I do like that. For this pictures, there's not really that much contrast. If you look up here at this histogram, you can see that there's no like true blacks and no true whites in the picture. So I'm going to bring the contrast up significantly. I'm going to bring my highlights up a tad, and I'm going to drop my shadows just to create that more contrast look. I'm going to bring up the texture and the clarity just because it was a little fuzzy, because this was shot on a GoPro. This was actually a screenshot from a video, and as you can see right here, it already looks so much better. I feel like there's so much more life to the picture. Same thing with vibrance. I'm going to bring it up a tad, and at my tone curve, some yellow tones back into the highlights. I'm going to do the same for the mid-tones for this one too. Yeah. And then I'm going to go right here, and I'm just going to play around with the blues just to get a really pretty shade of blue that I really like. It just amazes me every single time. Same thing here. I'm going to take some blues to the shadows a little bit. I just want to go back and see what changing the temp does. And actually, I think I'm going to boost the luminance on this. I'm going to go back to my mask right here. And I'm going to go ahead and add the radial. I'm going to increase the exposure just a tiny bit, you guys. I'm going to increase the contrast just so your eye is really drawn to that sculpture. I'm going to duplicate and invert this mask so that way it picks everything else that I didn't just work on. Just very subtle. I'm going to bring a hint of those light rays back on the ground. And then I like to look and see if there's anything else that I really notice. And I'm actually really happy with how this turned out.
This last picture is of me out at a cliff, and the first thing I want to do is warm this picture up. Next, I'm going to increase the exposure just a little bit, and then I'm going to drop the highlights all the way down just so we can see the sky a lot better. I'm going to raise the shadows a little bit so I get a little bit more details back, and I'm just going to adjust the whites and blacks to how I think it looks the best. And just to bring a little bit more life to this picture, I'm going to bring up the vibrance. Next, I'm going to go to my tone curve, and I'm going to go to the blues, and I'm going to put more blues into the shadows and more yellows and oranges into my highlights and midtones. Next, I'm going to play around with the blues to get a color that I like. And then for my greens, I'm going to drop the saturation a tiny bit and drop the luminance. And then the next thing is I'm going to create a mask. Instead of picking subject, I'm going to pick people where it detects me so later on I can go back and select certain parts of myself to edit. I'm going to go in and just retouch and just perfect it a little bit better. And then as you can see, I increase the exposure a tiny bit and drop the contrast a little. I'm going to create some warmth. And since I've done that, now I'm going to go back to what I was telling you about, and I'm going to select my hair. And I'm going to drop the saturation just so that way my hair doesn't look too yellow. Next, I'm going to pick a linear gradient just so your eye really focuses on me and the view. And that way it kind of hides the rocks a little bit. And then the next mask, I'm going to duplicate and invert what I've done to myself so I can focus on the background to separate myself a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more of a blue tint to it, and I'm going to get rid of a little bit of the greens. And then for my last mask, I'm going to take a brush and take all of the mountains, and I'm going to create more contrast in them. And then that's really it.
So that's the gist. That's how I'm really editing my photos these days. If y'all have any questions or want to see me edit any type of style, you just let me know in the comments. I appreciate you guys for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And that's it. Love you, babes. Bye.